Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Let's talk about drop rates. Specifically, let's talk about one of the Uber bosses that a lot of people do not enjoy running very much, and that is the Uber Shaper. Is it worth running this boss? Is this boss a waste of time to run? Well, let's go into this with some data that was collected by Reddit user u/FuriousIdiot, who definitely does not live up to either aspect of their Reddit username. This player has gone and run the Uber Shaper 1,000 times, but they've made a little bit of a mistake and they've accidentally run it an extra 5. And they've recorded every single loot drop that they got. Now, this was something that made them a very substantial amount of currency, but also gathered some data that we don't really have much of in the Path of Exile 1 community, because a lot of the drop rates here, as you'll see, are pretty low. And when it comes to low drop rates, it's actually very hard to pin down just what the actual drop rates really are.
I should probably also point out that I recorded this video originally literally a month ago. Then I got really busy in the lead up to 040 and Path of Exile 2 and forgot to get around to releasing it. So I thought today I'd edit it and fix that one up. Oops.
Here is a summary table that our good friend, the Furious Idiot, put together. And in their 1,005 runs, they got 399 Entropic Devastation, 364 Echoes of Creation, 220 Tides of Time. Those are the common and uncommon drops. As for the rare drops, they got 22 Starforge, 24 Sublime Vision, and they also got the guaranteed drops, 479 Fragment of Knowledge, 526 Fragment of Shape. Now you might look at those and say, hey, that's a big bias in favor of Fragment of Shape, but that's actually within normal statistical variance. So it's probably the case, in fact, I'm basically certain that it is the case, that the drop rate is 50-50 between knowledge and shape, and that this player just happened to get quite lucky with respect to getting more of the shape versions than they did of the knowledge versions. In fact, the shape versions were the more expensive, as they were running all of their runs. Also on top of this, they got 32 Orb of Dominance, 132 Shaper's Exalted Orbs, and a total of 4 Cosmic Reliquary Keys. This is a lot less than other people who've done largest sample sizes have got when it comes to Reliquary Keys. The most commonly thrown around number is about 1%, and as we'll talk about in a sec, this is actually normal when it comes to variance and sample sizes, even in the low 4 figures, like 1,000 runs. What can we actually say about the drop rates for real? It is probably true that Entropic Devastation, Echoes of Creation, and Tides of Time have a roughly 2 to 2 to 1 drop rate between the three of them. And Starforge is probably about 10 times rarer than all of those. However, we can't be absolutely certain on that. I'm just going to work to the assumption that it is actually the case, that it's 20 in 51 to get Entropic Devastation, 20 in 51 to get Echoes of Creation, 10 in 51 to get Tides of Time, and 1 in 51 to get Starforge. This would be perfectly in line with the data that's being collected here. On top of this, it's also very likely that it is a 50-50 split of knowledge and shape fragments, because if it was even a 51-49 split between the two, the one that was 49% would just be way more expensive in trade, and the one that was 51% would be basically worthless.
Editing GOG here, actually with a clarification / correction on that. It wouldn't be that it's worthless. The price of that fragment would be set by the harvest recipe that allows you to swap things around.
Now, when it comes to things that are genuinely rare though, Sublime Vision, Orb of Dominance, Cosmic Reliquary Key, and Starforge, there is a little statistical trick called a Wilson confidence interval. What a Wilson confidence interval does is it starts out by assuming that the probability is completely unknown. It can be anywhere from 0 to 1. Then it works out the conditional probability for each of those possible probabilities that you could pick. So probability is 7%, probability is 0.03%, and so on. And it works out what the probability would be of you getting exactly 22 from 1,005. Then it uses a bunch of calculus to integrate over this and to give you an approximation. This is the range where the probability should be, unless the person who did the 1,005 runs had either top 2.5% luck or bottom 2.5% luck. So assuming that the original poster of this thread was within that middle 95%, which would normally be the case but isn't quite always, then the real probability will fall somewhere inside their Wilson confidence interval. Well, the Wilson confidence interval, when you get 24 out of 1,005, is 1.61% to 3.529%. So you'll see that's quite a wide range. And that's because although 1,005 sounds like a huge sample size,
It's not really the 1005 that you need to pay attention to. The number you really need to pay attention to is the number of successes, 24, or in some cases, it's the number of failures, which in this case is 981. 981 runs that saw no Sublime Vision, 24 runs that saw one. Whichever of these numbers is smaller, this is the one that really, really reflects your sample size and really reflects how accurate you can actually claim your bounds to be. If you want this in more mathematical terms, the standard deviation of the drop rate that you get here is going to be proportional to the square root of whichever is lesser, the number of successes or the number of failures. This is a reasonably good estimate when the probability is wildly different from 0.5. So that is the reason that there is so little information that we can glean from this as to the exact drop rate of Sublime Vision and why it is such a wide range, why it could be anywhere from a 1 in 60 or even lower than 1 in 60 all the way up to 1 in 30 or slightly higher than 1 in 30. It's because we've only seen 24 drops here. How much further would you need to go if you really wanted to take this to the next level and if you really wanted to pin down the drop rate of Sublime Vision really accurately? The correct answer here is that you'd need to see a couple of hundred Sublime Vision drops. And to see a couple of hundred Sublime Vision drops, that is going to take a very, very, very large number of Uber Shaper runs, far beyond the capacity of any one individual to run. And this goes double when we talk about even rarer drops, such as the Cosmic Reliquary Key that we were talking about before. Only 4 of these came up in our friend the Furious Idiot's Uber Shaper runs. And you're going to need to see hundreds of them if you want to really pin down the drop rate of them accurately. The one thing we can say though here, and this is why Uber Shaper is so worth your while considering running if you're still interested in playing POE 1 at the current moment, is that the amount of dust that you get from sharding all of those entropic devastations is unbelievable. 640,000 dust is in line with the second rarest tier of uniques in Path of Exile 1. And not just the second rarest tier of uniques, things like Arakali's Fang that can drop anywhere, but the ones that have the highest drop level. 640,000 is a lot. And this is one of the most common drops that comes from the Uber Shaper. On top of that, it's not like the Tides of Time is complete trash, and Echoes of Creation, it can be a good item if it rolls well. So you've got a number of things here that could potentially result in you getting a large payoff for killing the Uber Shaper every time that you do it. Now, it's not like 640,000 Thaumaturgic Dust is going to make or break your entire league, but this is something that people would pay 80, 100, 120 Chaos in a mature league for, maybe even a little bit more again if the league really, really stagnates and goes on for ages. So, Uber Shaper provides a huge amount of dust, but at the same time as providing a huge amount of dust, there's a number of real jackpots in the form of Sublime Vision, and also just a number of other things that sell well. Orb of Dominance, it's not quite what you would call a jackpot. It's not going to make your whole day when it drops, but you're going to be happy to see it. And Shaper's Exalted Orbs. They're pretty cheap, but they add up. You get a lot of them. So there's a whole lot of things that are coming from this boss. And on top of that, you're also just getting a whole bunch of item level 87 rare items that are Shaper influenced. Most of them aren't worth very much, but also at the same time, most of them can just go into the shredder. Most of them can just be disenchanted. They're only going to disenchant for 15,000 dust or so, but that is still a positive use of your gold if you have nothing more pressing to use it on. So this is a pretty lucrative boss, definitely worth your while farming, but of course, you need to then balance that against 2 other factors. Firstly, this is not an easy boss to defeat, often requires a specialist boss killer, and secondly, and much more importantly, this is a boss that cannot be defeated quickly. The fastest I know of anyone completing this boss 25 times is a full hour. And that was Fearless Dumbo when he was trying to prove that he could do 25 of them in an hour. It took him a long time to optimize it, to the point that he was able to do 25 instances of Uber Shaper in an hour. Reason for this is that there's a number of oubliette phases that just cannot be done at lightning speed, and there's a number of RP elements in the fight. There's a whole bunch of mini bosses you've got to do. It's just a long encounter. So to finish with this, do I recommend running Uber Shaper? If you like the encounter, yes. This is a very lucrative way to farm a lot of currency in Path of Exile 1, at least at the time that this video was originally recorded, and even still at the time that I'm editing it. Of course, maybe if a bunch of people see this video and then react by buying a bunch of the fragments, getting good at the fight, and then setting it as their league start plan next league, I'm just going to farm Uber Shaper in the first week, then maybe that might change things. But in the 327 economy, it's a pretty good option to run. Whether it's the right one for you, though, is going to come down to whether you're going to have fun doing so or not, because there's plenty of other things you can do to generate currency in Path of Exile 1, but this is one of the more lucrative of them. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results, and if you're watching this video when it's quite new, may you have a happy new year.